Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today for this really important talk. My name is Kate Krug-Garvey, and I am the CEO of the King County Sexual Assault Resource Center. In just a few minutes, I'm going to turn things over to our prevention education team. Some of you may know about this team's direct work with our young people in schools, and some of you may be familiar with their latest initiative, supporting and building connections between young leaders who are doing some pretty amazing prevention work right in their own communities. But this team has also been really busy, especially in the last year or so, responding to an enormous demand for training and education from parents and caregivers, community groups, and systems and school-based professionals who want to better equip themselves to protect children and young people from sexual abuse. It gives me hope to see so many of you here today as we continue to observe Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month. I hope you take away something that you can share with others about recognizing and responding to grooming. So a few housekeeping things before we get started. First, we'll have time for questions at the end. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat as we go along, and we'll get as many as we can to today. Second, the presentation today is being recorded, and there will be resources mentioned that we will send out to those of you afterward. Third, if you have any technical difficulties today, please message the presenters in the chat, and we'll get you some assistance. With that, I want to bring in Chris Johnson, our Director of Prevention Services. Chris, I'm really looking forward to hearing from you and your team today.
Thanks, Kate. Hey, everybody. It's really nice to be here talking about this topic today. I think one of the things that Kate said that I would like to just reinforce is that this is a topic that we have been getting a lot of requests for. We've been getting a lot of requests from schools on the topic of grooming and sexual misconduct, but we've also been getting a lot of requests from different parent groups and PTSAs. Today we are going to be talking about grooming for sexual abuse. We're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. We're going to provide several case examples, and more importantly, sort of how our understanding of this can actually lead to preventing of abuse and prevention. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So on our first slide today, I kind of want to just set the stage and define what this is. I feel like the word grooming, especially over the last few years, has really sort of taken on a life of its own and has come to mean all sorts of things. So I want to be very clear when we are talking about grooming for sexual abuse, what that means. The other thing that I would like to mention before we get started is I know that sexual assault and sexual abuse impacts a great deal of us. It's not uncommon as I go through these presentations with various audiences that folks get a different understanding of their own experiences. And so I encourage you, if things I talk about today, things that I mentioned today, maybe they don't sit particularly well with you. Maybe memories start coming up again for you as a result of this conversation. I encourage you to take care of yourself, use those supports that are there for you that you already use. And if you need additional support, we are always there for you, of course. So grooming for sexual abuse. When we talk about this, we are actually talking about a process that some sexual abusers use to facilitate sexual contact between themselves and a minor, while at the same time avoiding detection. I basically conceptualize grooming as the process of gaining trust of a child in order to gain access of the child so that they can abuse that child. And part of that process of gaining trust is also gaining the trust of all of the other adults who surround that child. When we talk about grooming for sexual abuse, I also want to let folks know that not all sexual abuse or sexual assault involves grooming. This type of grooming that we're talking about is generally seen with people with different power dynamics. So in particular, a lot of the stuff that I talk about today are those instances where it is an adult or an older child, 17 years old, who is grooming a much younger child for sexual assault or sexual abuse. but I also understand that this is not everybody's experience. Um, but grooming for sexual assault is one of these things that has been studied and has been researched and documented because the behaviors that go into grooming for sexual abuse are so consistent, that they've been able to actually track how grooming unfolds over different populations and see a lot of different similarities in this. So today I'm going to talk about these 4 steps of grooming, and then I'm going to provide examples of this because I think it's very easy to hear these things and then not to really understand how they fit into sort of the real world. So we're going to talk about this in these 4 steps. So this first step of grooming is the target selection. And this target selection is something that, I feel like is conceptualized as sort of a casting wide nets, right? We know that while all children are vulnerable to sexual abuse, there are children who are more vulnerable to sexual abuse than others. Not everyone is at equal risk. And this target selection process is a process of trying to determine vulnerability or unmet need from a potential pool of victims. And so the person who is abusing children, or who is wanting to abuse children, they are going to spend time trying to find a target, a child who is going to be more vulnerable than the rest of the children around them. And they can do this in a variety of ways. And the stuff that we're going to talk about today is going to be things that occur both in real life, but also online. Because one of the things we're going to talk about today is, while a lot of this still occurs in real life, things that can still be seen, a lot of these things, including target selection, sometimes take place online, which makes it a lot harder to detect. But this target selection, this first step, is a deliberate process, and it is searching for a vulnerability. Um, and this vulnerability or unmet need could be things like somebody who has a lot of free reign. They have very minimal supervision. Maybe they have maybe there's very few adults in their life. Maybe they have a marginalized identity or background that sets them up for a vulnerability. But these people who are wanting to offend against kids, this is the first step: is target selection. The next step is gaining trust. And this is, I think, one of these things that can really go undetected from people on the outside. When we talk about gaining trust of a child, this is not a bad thing to gain trust of a child. In fact, when I do these trainings for nurses or counselors or social workers, I often ask the question of the audience: when you are trying to gain the trust of a child who is a client of yours, what do you do? And you can imagine the responses I get. Well, I want to find out what the music that child is listening to. I want to know what their memes are making them laugh. I want to know what they do online. I want to know what video games they're playing. They get to want to know the interests of the children, because that is a way of gaining trust of a child. So while we often gain trust of kids for good reasons, people who are abusers are doing that for an ulterior motive. And we'll get into more of why this happens and why this plays out in a little bit. This third step is desensitizing. And desensitizing can look different based on that child. But it's basically desensitizing that child to sexual contact. And that desensitizing could look like non-sexual physical touch, like massages or roughhousing. But desensitizing could also look like exposing kids to pornography or sexual abuse material online. So it is also that desensitizing can also look like a normalizing of behavior. Showing kids pornography is a way of saying, look how normal this is. Look at it's all of this pornography. We're like adults and kids do this. Look how common it is. Or piquing curiosity. So that desensitizing is another step. And then once they have the target, the trust, they've desensitized them, that is when the sexual assault or abuse occurs. And then the final step in there is manipulating that child into keeping that secret. What does that offender do or say to make sure that that abuse is going to go undetected? And that can look like, again, depending on the child and the family, can look like a whole host of things. It could be as simple as giving a child a gift to keep them secret. It could be threatening them or their family, threatening their physical safety, threatening a pet, threatening things like deportation. Um, it could also be things like just a withdrawal of affection, telling a child, if you tell, I'm going to go to prison and we're not going to be able to have a relationship anymore. So that manipulating a child into keeping a secret looks very differently depending on that child. But it's these four steps are almost always played out in the very same order. And then finally, what I have at the bottom of this thing is the grooming of adults, because that is also critically important. Most parents, if they have given the choice, will not leave their child in the company of another adult who they don't trust. So it's just natural that somebody who is intent on harming a child also has to gain the trust of the adults who surround that child to have access to that child. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to tell a couple of stories that incorporate these four steps, and I want to show you, demonstrate how these look, giving different contexts. Um, so sometimes grooming for sexual abuse can unfold over months and years. Sometimes grooming for sexual abuse can happen over a matter of minutes. But these steps all look the same. And I'm going to give you two different examples of what this looks like, sort of a longer version, sort of a long game that an offender plays, and then sort of a shorter game. So this first story that I'm going to tell you, both of these are true stories. And this first one is a story that happened and made the news many, many years ago up in Snohomish County, I believe. And this was back in, I believe, probably back in the 90s or early aughts. But it's a really prime example of sort of how the prototypical offender operates. So this case involved a basketball coach, middle school basketball coach. He was coaching boys at the beginning of the school year. And very early on in the school year, a few days in, he had made an announcement to all of the boys in the middle school that they're going to be starting a premier basketball league this year. And it's going to be awesome, right? They're gonna have field trips down to see the Seattle Supersonics play. The athletes are going to come to their school. They're going to get to go get out of class early to go on different competitions. They're going to get a level of coaching that's really going to set them up for success in high school. It's going to be so cool. And the only thing you have to do to be part of this is to stay after school today. Well, that was the first step of target selection for this guy. By him saying, the first thing you have to do, the only thing you have to do today is just stay after school today if you want to be part of this group. Well, what this was in his mind was him determining, out of all of these kids who I've thrown this offer out to, how many of them can actually stay after school on a moment's notice without checking with mom or dad? That was his first question in his mind. And he narrowed his scope of potential targets down to those kids who were able to stay after school on a moment's notice. Because in his mind, he thought, well, maybe they have a little less supervision than some of these other kids. Maybe they don't have a greatest relationship with their parents than some of these other kids do. So I'm going to focus my attention on them. So he's narrowed the scope down just a little bit. The next thing he did was by gaining trust. And again, this was by being super well liked, by getting all of the players, getting them out of class early, getting the McDonald's when they do really well. He was really liked and had really gained the trust of not only those athletes, but a lot of the teachers in that school also, who really saw him as sort of a really great coach that a lot of the kids could relate to. So he had gained that trust early on. But then the desensitizing started. So he now had this group of kids that he was sort of focused on. And what he began to do was he began to massage the players. He would rub their shoulders, He would rub their chests and rub their backs. And the next group of kids that he sort of weeded out of this potential target pool were those kids that went home, told mom or dad, hey, the coach at school is touching me. It's making me feel weird. Mom or dad get on the horn and say, what the heck's happening at school? My kid came home and said the coach is touching them, rubbing their backs and chests, making them feel weird. And of course, the coach says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I should have known better. I used to work with developmentally delayed students, and we found that physical stimulation just helped them perform better. And that's all I was doing. But I could totally understand if that makes you feel upset or makes you feel uncomfortable, and if it makes your child feel uncomfortable, I'll certainly stop doing that." And he did for those kids who told mom or dad. And for those who didn't, now he had even a smaller group of students that he was focused on. Um, he would also do things like go outside and volunteer for bus pickup. And he would stand outside and he would watch those students that he had an eye on. When mom or dad pulled up in their van, he would watch the interaction as that kid got in that car. And, in his mind, he was looking for the difference between that child who opens that door of the car and mom or dad is like, hey, what's up? How you doing? How's your day? Hope, yeah, I got a snack for you. Get in here. We got to go pick your sister up. Versus the kid who, when the door opens, gets yelled at. I hope you brought your homework. Sit in there. Put your ass in that car. Versus that interaction. So this guy was very keen on target selection, gaining trust, and desensitizing. And now he had a group of students that he felt comfortable that he could abuse. And those massages that were on their shoulders eventually went down their pants. And his threat to keep them from talking was, well, you'll get kicked off the team. If anybody thinks that we're doing anything weird or wrong, you won't be able to be on the team anymore. I might actually lose my job. And that was enough for some of the kids. Not all of them, because one of the kids did report, and there was an investigation, and he was charged and he was convicted. But that process is the grooming process laid out in stark terms. Now, I want to also tell you another story, because this talks about all of these same steps, but how this plays out in a matter of minutes instead of a matter of weeks or months. Now, this is a personal story of mine. This took place when I was about 10 years old. And we were at an airport in Newark, Ohio, and we were up there visiting my aunt. And we were waiting in line, or waiting at the gate to come home. And my parents, of course, patiently waiting at the gate. And at the time, I had no patience whatsoever, in particular because they had an arcade at this airport. And I was all about video games. And I convinced my parents to let me go to the arcade, which was, sort of at the other end of the terminal. And I went there with my $2 and quarters or whatever I had. And I started playing this game called Area 51. Now, I don't know, I have no idea who's on this call with me today, the ages of people here, but Area 51 was a video game from the 80s. It was a two-player game, and it was a console game. It had two guns on it. And it was one of these video games that, you're pretending like you're shooting aliens, and you can play it with another person. But I was playing it by myself. And after one of my games, there was a guy who came up to me. He was probably in his late 20s. And he was like, hey, can I play? And I was like, sure, sure. It was always much better with two players. And so he started playing that game with me. We were having a good time. And, one of the things about this game was the proximity into which you had to play next to the other person. So when you're lining up your sights of your gun, your heads are right next to the other person. So close, in fact, that I remember distinctly how bad this guy's breath was. I also remember that he had really bad teeth. So we're playing this game. The game ends. He's like, "Oh, don't worry." He gets out a big pocket full of quarters and stacks all the quarters up against the top of the video game. And I was like, "Sweet, we are going to be here until my plane comes. I'm going to be playing video games this whole time." And just about we had played probably one more game, and he was like, "Oh, all right." He's like, "Hey, you know what? I got to run to the bathroom. Why don't you come with me?" Um, and I, went with him. I started following him to the bathroom. And this whole time, as I'm walking with him, I start getting this feeling of dread. I have no idea why. I don't, there's nothing that I am able to pinpoint in my environment that's causing me this fear. But the closer I get to this bathroom, and as he enters this bathroom, this fear becomes so intense in me that I bolt to my parents as fast as I can. I never went in the bathroom. Um, so that the sexual assault and touch never occurred. But at this point in my career, I know what would have happened had I gone in that bathroom. And of course, when I got back down to the end of the terminal with my parents, I sat back down and never said a word. Didn't say a word. Um, but again, that is how that target selection and gaining trust and desensitizing can play out even in a very quick period of time. And of course, I also just want to throw out there, that's rare. It's rare for strangers to approach somebody in a place like that, um, because we know that it's generally people we know, like, and trust who do this. But that individual did gain my trust, even an iota of it, and thought I was alone, didn't have any parental oversight at the time, and thought I was a good target. But I just throw that out there. This is not a very common situation. Okay. Um, but with that, I want to kick it over to my other colleagues, and I want them to start talking about um, things to look for, red flags. One of the things I really appreciate about grooming and learning about grooming, and why I think it's valuable in teaching it, it is because it is one of those tangible things that adults can do to actually prevent sexual abuse. Um, of course, like I said, it's not going to work for everyone in every situation, but gaining this awareness about how this unfolds, what to look for, can be really powerful. So, Hannah, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm just going to briefly go over a couple of the red flags that we have. I believe those are just going to be on the next slide. But I'm going to just touch on those very quickly. It's helpful for us to know what some of those are, like Chris was just saying, because it is such a clear pattern of behavior and so consistent. It can be helpful for us to recognize these things and know, especially because, like Chris was saying on the previous slide, adults are groomed along with the child. So good for us to know. These red flags that are listed out here actually come from a couple of books written by Carla Van Dam. They're called Identifying Child Molesters and The Socially Skilled Child Molester. I'm smiling because those were the two first books that Chris had Jessica and I read when we joined the prevention team. They are dense and intense, but they are very good reads and give a lot of information just about this process of grooming and things that you can look out for and recognize in your own community. So these are a couple of the red flags from that book specifically. I'm going to just go through them. So a couple things, if you notice this in an adult, especially an adult who you see interacting with children a lot, an adult who is in a position to be spending a lot of their time with children or in multiple positions, we've also seen that a lot, that if this person is exceptionally charming or hopeful, again, I should have said this up top, but these red flags don't automatically mean someone is grooming your child or a child. They're just things to keep in mind and look out for. And as it says at the bottom, it's kind of like an amalgamation of these behaviors, that gut feeling, all of that kind of together that could lead to potentially checking in with somebody about them, checking in with the person themselves also, and asking like, hey, I just wanted to check in, like, you're spending a lot of time with my child and we have some boundaries around that, so I want to talk to you about it. So again, this doesn't automatically mean someone is a groomer, but these are things that are found to be red flags in the situation. So if this person is exceptionally charming or helpful, Chris and I were actually talking about this yesterday, that charming is not a personality trait, right? Charming is a strategy. So is this person trying to charm people? Are they trying to get people to like them, garner trust quickly within a community, and helping, really, really helpful? Oftentimes we see this with folks maybe who there's a single parent household and this person steps up to fill a role. They offer to babysit, they offer to give this child rides, they offer to do a lot of things around the house. While on the surface, those seem like really nice and kind and wonderful things, they also give extra access to the child for that person, which is part of those steps that Chris was just talking about, right? Engaging in peer-like play, preferring the company of children. If you are at a party with adults and children, and there is an adult who is spending all of their time upstairs with the kids rather than interacting with the adults, that's possibly a red flag, right? Also somebody who, as Chris said, is kind of going out of their way and almost like desensitizing to touch. That goes along with the roughhousing, wrestling, and tickling. If that's done, it can often also be done in front of other adults too. And for that child, it can end up being really confusing if another adult doesn't say anything, right? And if that person who is grooming this child accidentally touches that kid's private body parts while they're tickling them and says, "Oh, I didn't mean to, my bad," and then it happens again. And as I said, if it happens in front of other adults who don't say anything, that child might be confused. Like, was that okay? Was that not okay? My parents didn't say anything. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe it's fine. And then failing to honor clear boundaries, which again kind of goes hand in hand with that physical touch, maybe pushing past after a child has said, "I'm not really comfortable with that." If parents even have already set boundaries, like, please don't drive my child home from school again, like the school should call us and we will call them. We have boundaries around that in our family. And then if that person gets defensive or puts you on the defensive when you ask, we say this all the time, but you can tell a lot about a person, how they respond to your boundary. You set a boundary with someone and automatically they get upset and they start saying, "How could you not trust me? What is wrong with you? I am a great person. Everybody likes me. What's your problem?" Right? That's a huge red flag. That person is really defensive when you ask them to honor your boundaries. So again, these are just some red flags and some things for us to think about. I also just want to highlight, and I know Jessica needs to hop in really soon, but I also just want to highlight that none of these things, or I hope that these things are also helpful in you all understanding that if a child does get groomed for child sexual abuse, it is never a failure to protect for the parents. And that hopefully it is clear at this point in this training that this is a really calculated and specific behavior and pattern of behavior for groomers. And it's really difficult, as much as we can see these red flags, it can be really, really difficult to know when it's happening and what's happening. So it is not a failure on the part of the parents or the adults if they see these things and it still happens. And with that, I'm going to kick it to Jessica.
Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to now talk about another case. And we can think and as well, and something that I'm going to highlight, because what you'll see is that it is very similar, as Chris has said, to the other examples, the other case examples that we've given. But I'm also going to focus on what happens when we maybe don't follow those gut instincts, and some of the things that maybe will keep us from either talking to somebody or talking about this in general, or potentially even reporting somebody. So this is another example of a paraeducator, so not a teacher, in King County, who has recently been found guilty by a jury on 2 counts of child molestation in the first degree and 1 count of rape of a child in the first degree. And both of those recent charges are including aggravators because of that position of trust that this paraeducator held in this community. They are currently pending sentencing. This is how recently this case went to trial. So they're currently facing between 13 and 25 years. There's also another pending case as well. But this is a case example that we use because they wrote very specifically in KUOW about how the system was not responding well to these concerns that were raised by the community. So you'll see that there were many coworkers who raised concerns that this paraeducator was letting students, typically boys, young boys, sit on his lap, was giving them gifts. He would buy things for students. He would go out of his way to be very helpful and offer to bring these students home from school, from class. Would often try to spend time away from other adults with these students. So would offer to be the one to take them inside the building to go to the bathroom or any of these things. And a lot of the staff members would notice these behaviors, particularly these behaviors with 4th and 5th grade boys. So we can go to the next slide. And these are just some quotes that we've also pulled from the article that were things that people said after this paraeducator was charged initially with these crimes. They would say things like, "Oh, well, he's just immature. Like he's a very immature guy for his age. These are probably just misunderstandings or rumors. Like he was a local kid. He's kind of odd, but generally he's fine." And a lot of the issues too that people raised with bringing up their concerns when they were noticed is because of the fact that this paraeducator was an out gay man. And so they were very aware, which is fair, that they were very aware that reporting a gay man for his relationships or seeming relationships with boys in these schools could perpetuate inaccurate stereotypes for people in the LGBT community. But my favorite quote is the one below that, where like they were recognizing that this district was trying to be self-aware. However, two truths can exist. And that is something that is really important to remember, that especially when we're talking about people that are innately charming and well-liked and hold usually places of power within these communities, that two things can be true at the same time. This person, like you may not have had any of these experiences with this person. This person might be a member of a community that historically has been blamed for a lot of these things, and they could still be hurting children. And so making sure that when we feel those gut feelings and can see some of these red flags playing out, that we don't talk ourselves out of talking to somebody about it or potentially reporting these things because of things that we're telling ourselves that could be, well, there's just no way that this could be true. But trying to recognize and respond to those feelings and those inner red flags that are popping up. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you, Abigail. So because these were also things that these other coworkers and other people in the community were realizing, is like, you know, why is he first in line to offer to take kids to the bathroom? Why is he doing homework with kids in a closet with a closed door? He's constantly showing these kids movies on their phones. Something else that this person would use as a way to gain trust and also to gain secrecy and isolation and was that he was very tech savvy, and he would create a lot of Minecraft servers that these kids would be able to use and access. And then, of course, he was also able to use and access these servers and would communicate with these students through these online platforms as well. So kind of like what Chris was saying, is we're seeing a lot of this grooming that is occurring in online spaces as well. And a lot of times things quickly move to online spaces just because it does give them more consistent access to these young people. And that's also like, that's the way that they communicate with their friends and with their peers, and that's what they're comfortable communicating. And then also it allows them to have more access to them. So instead of having to wait until those kids were at school to communicate with them when they weren't at the school. And then you'll see again that these quotes of like their instincts were telling them that something was wrong and that they should do something about it. and there was this accumulation of strange behavior that was setting off alarm bells. So again, like, this isn't just one thing or one of those red flags that somebody was noticing. This was many red flags over a course of time. And then also, this person was talked to by the district a few times and did not change their behavior, which again is that once you've communicated what boundaries should be, and they are not listening to that, that's a pretty good red flag that somebody has been communicated to and isn't following through with the things that was communicated to them. And so it's just, this is another example of where not only were these students being groomed, but it was a community that was being groomed by this person. I think it took there was about 8 or 9 different reports that were made to administration about this teacher. And also, just for you all to know, and especially for the parents to know in this room, because we work through this a lot in our team. It's really hard when systems don't respond the way that we expect them to or would like them to, and that can feel very frustrating and out of our control. And also, all of these things came out, and this person ended up being charged because one of the parents of a child that was in this person's care recognized a change in their child's behavior and responded to that change in that child's behavior, asked them what was going on, if there's anything that they wanted them to know, that they weren't going to get in trouble for if anything happened or anything like that. And then this child was able to open up to their parent and let them know what happened. And then this cascade of disclosures came after that. But it's good, again, to also recognize that while some people might not be able to get certain systems to respond, we can always listen to our kids and respond effectively and in the right way when they do raise this concern that comes up. And I will pass it back to Hannah.
Great. And I'm going to wrap us up with a slide with a couple of red flags that we specifically talk to youth about and talk to young people about. Jessica and I do talk about grooming when we are in high schools, and we like to make sure that the young people that we're talking to are also really informed about this and have accurate information. Many of you who spend a lot of time with young people and many of you who spend time online yourself know that there is tons of inaccurate information accessible and available, and that grooming has been completely misconstrued in a lot of ways. So when we talk to youth about it, this list up here of red flags is one that we share with them. We share this exact slide because we also want them to be able to know not only how to seek this out for themselves if they're experiencing some of these behaviors with a person in their life, but also if their friend comes to them and tells them that any of these things are happening, we want young people to know that's grooming and that's not okay, right? And that maybe this person might need some help or might need some support, and that they also know how to get in touch with us at KCSARC to help support that kid, or at least just to know what to say. We've talked to many students who now know what consent is and are able to say to their friends, "Hey, what happened to you is not consent. You know, can I help support you?" And we often get the question of, how do I support my friends? So part of that is being informed, right? Part of supporting your friends is knowing what is okay and not okay and what some of these red flags could possibly be. I'll run through them. First one, of course, privately, secretly giving you special attention, special personal gifts in exchange for your silence. So in those 4 steps that Chris talked about at the start of this, right? Manipulating you into keeping a secret. Maybe, unfortunately, this person will abuse that child and then go take them out for ice cream. We've heard that happen before, right? Showing you pornography or providing access to drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, vaping products, right? The pornography bit is that desensitization. Sending or asking for naked photos also falls in line with that and touches on a little bit of what Jessica was saying about online spaces too, and this use of technology within those grooming steps. I also just wanted to highlight the drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, right? Like using illegal substances and providing a child with illegal substances can also be a means of control and keeping them quiet. So oftentimes we also will see groomers who abuse a child, provide them with alcohol or marijuana, and then say, you better not tell anybody because you were drinking at that time and you're going to get in trouble for drinking. So it's also a way to keep that person quiet. Things also like sneaking out of the house, right? Saying you're going to get in trouble because you snuck out of the house, so you better not tell anybody. Making sexual remarks about physical appearance, development. And then the last two are really big ones that we talk about with youth a lot, right? It's like, there's no reason for an adult in your life to talk about their personal problems with you. There's no reason for an adult to be talking about their sex life with a young person or their marriage or the problems that they're having with their partner. We talk a lot about the difference between mentorship and grooming, because as Chris sort of pointed out, like gaining trust of a young person can look a lot like how mentorship looks at the beginning. You're just building a relationship with them, right? And in this case, that it of course is very different. And also when it comes to grooming, that groomer is not focusing on that child like a mentor normally would, or a teacher or a safe adult would, right? That groomer is focusing on themselves and doing what they need in order to get what they want from this child. So that includes things like sharing their personal problems as a means of sort of gaining trust and building that relationship with them. I also know that we are sending along a couple of additional resources after this, and one of them does have an even longer list of some red flags that you all can keep in mind. And the way it's broken up is pretty cool. It's sort of like red, orange, and yellow. So that is also going to be provided to you after this with just a few additional red flags for you to look out for. And then we have one more slide with a few more resources that I will end on. I see we're getting some great questions, so we're going to get right to those in just a second. But yeah, so this is the last slide. The Link to Prevention podcast, for those of you who haven't listened, is the podcast that we created on the prevention team. Most recently, we had a 6-part series about personal safety, and that is hopefully to help some parents give some tips. The last episode is really great. We interview a high school student, and she talks a lot about some of these behaviors and how to talk to your child and support your child. And then these are some additional websites we like, and of course, our resource line at the bottom if you need it. I'm keeping us on time, so I think we're gonna end there and head into our Q&A.
Excellent, Hannah. Thank you. That
Thanks,
is
Chris.
a lot of information. But yeah, we've gotten a few good questions in the chat, so let's take some of these questions. So there's a couple in here that are sort of grouped in the same way. So I think we can answer a couple of these with one. But is it considered grooming if a step parent is the one doing the grooming? And does grooming occur the same way when it's a parent abusing the child?
I can answer
Sure,
this
you would like to
question.
go? Yeah, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that yes, it does still look very similar. The target selection, I would say, especially when you're talking about like the step parent, what we notice is that something that makes young people vulnerable is if they have a single parent. Unfortunately, that is somebody that a perpetrator will often seek out to build a relationship with the parent, that will then give them access to that child. So the target selection might look a little bit different. And then also, like when we talk about, there are certain aspects of grooming for sexual abuse where the target selection is just that is the young, like that is a child that this person already has access to, and that's how they select that target. But as far as like the gaining of trust, the desensitization, like all of that is still going to look extremely similar. And yeah, regardless of if it's a parent or a step parent.
Yeah, and we also know, right, with any sexual assault that you're most commonly going to be hurt by someone you know and like and trust. So this falls into that, unfortunately, as well.
Yeah.
Great. Here's another question. What is the best course of action if a child tells you they are in a relationship with an adult and you want to get their parents involved before any sexual assault happens, but it is an LGBTQ relationship and you don't want to out them to their parents?
Yeah.
That's a good question. And that's one that we are super duper mindful of when we talk to students in classrooms, if you can talk to that student themselves and have the type of relationship, I would say first to talk to that student about relationships and power dynamics, and also just like legally, age of consent laws are there. And as we can't get into them, unfortunately, I wish we could, but they are really about age difference and power difference. And if a child is in a relationship, child's anyone under the age of 18 too, right? So if a child is in a relationship with an adult, not only is it probably inappropriate, it might not be legal. So depending on your relationship with that child, that could be a good way to just have a conversation with them about it and check in with them about it. And also, I don't know, recognize where they're at, that you don't want to out them. And it's kind of a both and, right? You want them to be safe. And part of them being safe is making sure that people know and understand who they're in a relationship with, and that they can get support. Either if you want to add anything, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and then also like you could include conversations about like if we do like we do need to tell your parents about this, I can help you prepare to have that conversation with them. I can be a support person if that conversation doesn't go very well. Like also letting them know that you'll support them in all aspects of this as well.
That's great. Here's a couple more questions. So one is, does the grooming look, do these steps apply to grooming adults also, or is this only for grooming children?
Chris, you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, I think it's when we talk about grooming. So I guess I have my brain goes in two different places. One is grooming the adults who are around that child, or grooming adults for their own abuse. So I'm going to kind of answer maybe both of those. I think it's either way. I think the gaining of the trust is going to be there, whether you are, so you're gaining the trust of the adults. So however you gain trust of adults, offering assistance, asking for help yourself, providing services at no charge, that could look very much like gaining trust. But it could also be you're just in a relationship with somebody, and you build a relationship, in order to hurt someone. So, what's really difficult, and I think this is probably true for adults as well, if they are also being groomed for harm, it's really hard to know what is happening, because grooming is not illegal, and grooming can look like mentorship. Grooming can look like friendship, until these other elements start coming into it. So I would say that the target selection and gaining trust would be the same. Desensitizing, that could also be a normalization of whatever type of behavior they are wanting to engage in, but also a normalizing of this is the expectation of the relationship. That could also be something in there. And then I would imagine the manipulation and threats would be very, very similar. And again, it's going to depend on what that person who is being groomed is can be held over their head. How are they blackmailed? How are they silenced? Let's see. I think we have one more question here. So, okay. Last one I think is, have you seen these situations where grooming wasn't intentional or consciously done, but the relationship that developed led to sexual assault? Or is it usually specific and intentional? I can answer that. So when we talk about the grooming process, that includes abuse, and that includes undermining that victim, making that victim be afraid to come forward, keeping them silent. So when we think about that grooming for abuse, that is that entire process. It's not just the gaining trust and manipulation and desensitizing. So, I would say that, of course, people get into relationships all the time and are sexually assaulted within relationships, whether those are dating relationships, that does happen. So I think that you can have a relationship where you're sexually assaulted but this grooming process is intentional. And if it isn't if you're not going into the relationship with the intention to harm, then it wouldn't be grooming. But certainly you could be in a relationship where you're sexually assaulted, even though if that wasn't the initial intent of getting into that relationship.
Mhm.
All right, I think we got one more that just popped in here. Jessica Hannah, what if you tried to inform a child in a predatory relationship that they're being groomed, but they are in denial? How can we help them?
Yeah, that can be really difficult. Speaking from, so I was a legal advocate as well before I moved to prevention, and I had quite a few cases that were age of consent cases, so like what Hannah was talking about, where an older adult was in a romantic or sexual relationship with someone under the age of 16. And a lot of times those young people thought that they were in a consenting relationship. And what Hannah and I always do is you can't, like we always say, you can't force somebody to understand or comprehend or see something. I mean, even as adults, I'm sure we've all experienced trying to tell our friends that they're not in a healthy relationship, and that doesn't always work out the way that we want it to. And so I think all you can do is provide examples of what healthy relationships should look like. And something that Hannah and I talk a lot about is power and a balance of power within relationships. And if you have somebody who is significantly older than you, like there is always going to be a power difference in that relationship because of that age difference. And so being mindful of how that power can be manipulated and used against you, how you may not be able to fully understand what it is that you are agreeing to because of how old you are, letting them know that they should have power and should feel like they have power to make their own decisions within their relationships. And just kind of like, we always say, especially when we're talking to young people who are trying to let their friends know that the relationship they're in is not very healthy, is like just reminding them what it should look like, questioning those times where you recognize that there's a power imbalance, like, ooh, I don't think that sounds very healthy. Like we should talk about that and what that should actually look like in a relationship. And I think allowing them to be able to recognize these things and see these things and then make that decision for themselves can be very important. And then also, as an adult who is maybe trying to let this child know these things, like I think it is very fine to let them know that there are certain instances in which it is illegal. Just bottom line, full stop, it is illegal for certain people to be in a sexual or romantic relationship with people under a certain age. And so that is not okay for that adult to be doing that, and that you might have to report certain things depending on if you're a mandated reporter or what you're comfortable with, that there are certain things that just might have to be reported to law enforcement because it is illegal.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we are about out of time today, but we will be able to follow up with some of these other questions. We have some additional resources that we will be putting out into an email for everybody here online. With that, I just want to say thank you all for joining us today. I hope this was some new information for you. I hope it's given you some things to think about. And please watch your inboxes for the resources that we mentioned, and have a good rest of your day.